including the role of ethics. That's what I want to do next. Okay, so one thing that's different about this course compared to your standard principles course is that I've really tried to pull out the ethical principles that are necessary for people's behavior in order to generate functioning of the economic system. And I'm going to argue that that actually can help us better the differing opinions or positions of Stiglitz and Friedman. Okay, so this course is highlighted why ethical behavior helps to promote economic efficiency. Okay, or alternatively, we can say, why does unethical behavior, why is that bad for the economy? Okay, and I'm going to give you a summary of that in just a minute. Okay, unethical behavior by itself, we should recognize then, could be characterized as an imperfection in the market. Markets are imperfect or they fail in some way, market failure, whenever people behave unethically in a particular context. Okay, and so that means, and what I want to highlight is that ethical behavior really means that we can't have unfettered self-interest. We can't let people just go wild and do whatever they want, because if they did, we'd get a lot of bad economic outcomes. How do we constrain them? I'm going to talk about that. But one constraint on behavior is this presumption that people ought to behave a certain way. And those presumptions are characterized as ethical principles here. So let's talk about those. All right, so I've got this listed, the right and the left, and kind of on the right, it's what not to do, and on the left, what to do. It's kind of different ways of stating the same principle here. But let me just focus in on some of these and where they've come up. So the first one is what not to do. You shouldn't be violent with each other or try to force others into doing certain things in markets against their will. Violence happens in markets from time to time. You know, when we talked about Smith and Jones coming together and trading voluntarily with each other, we said that they have another option open to them. They could come to the market with a big club, hit the other one over the head, and take everything and go home. That response would potentially maximize individual self-interest, and it would certainly be unfettered self-interest. But what would happen if people behave that way all the time? Well, we can infer that individuals would be afraid to go to the market. They would be concerned that their property, their goods that they brought would be stolen on the way by roving bandits, for example. Or maybe they would suffer injury or maybe death because of the violence at the market, people trying to steal things away from them. All right, so violence, theft, coercion, these two principles, if that were a common occurrence in markets, then we wouldn't get voluntary exchange, and we wouldn't get the winner, both sides win, kind of win-win outcomes that come from Smith and Jones types of trade. On the other side, what are we inspiring people? How should they behave? Well, they should be kind to each other, being nice. You know, be good to your neighbor, be good to your family, be good to others. Don't be violent. Don't try to take things away from each other. Respect the property of others. It's an important consideration in order for a free market system to work. And that's the application of an ethical principle in the economic market. Deception or fraud. We also introduced that in our Smith and Jones trade and said that Smith and Jones trade was based on the circumstance or assumption that that information is perfect, that you know what you're getting all the time. And in that context, any trade is going to be welfare improving for both sides. But what if it's not? What if, as Stiglitz would suggest, there's a lot of imperfect information out there and individual businesses might be inclined to deceive their consumers and try to rip them off? We see that happen all the time in real world markets. And if that were to happen on a regular, all the time basis, well, people would stop going to markets. They would be very distrustful of who they're working with. They would narrow their trades to just people in their local community who they can kind of watch and witness. Forget about this, trade with people across the world. I mean, if we can't trust people, we're not going to trade with total strangers on the other side of the world. And that's going to narrow our focus. And as a result of narrowing who we trade with, we're going to narrow our expression of comparative advantage. We're going to be less efficient in production. Economic efficiency is going to suffer. So the more deception or fraud there is by individual businesses or individuals in the market, the worse an economy functions. Okay, on the left-hand side, what does that mean? It means be honest, keep your promises. If you sign a contract and say you're going to pay back money in the future, then you ought to fulfill that promise and pay back money in the future. That comes out to things like now, should we forgive student loans? Sounds like a great idea, just forgive the student loans. But the student loan was a contract between an individual who said, I'm going to be willing to borrow this money and I promise to pay it back in the future. And to renege on that and to just say, oh, well, now it's just forgiven, means somebody has to incur a cost and pay back the money, or is responsible for the money that's not going to be paid back. That money has to come from somebody. And we've got to think through all of those considerations in thinking about policies like that. Okay, so those are a few of the primary principles, ethical principles that people ought to follow. The next big one is no monopolizing or trade restraint, restricting of trade. And this is a really big issue and a really big problem in most economies today, which is firms have an incentive to try to limit competition. That's in their own individual interest. And they can do that by many different ways. We talked about how, they, at first and foremost, they could try to differentiate their product. That by itself could be a good thing. But they could also merge with other firms and try to increase their concentration and their size in the particular industry. They could try to put in place licensing agreements and try to prevent people from using certain things. They could try to, get government rules or regulations in place that give them a special position in the marketplace. There's a whole range of things that firms can do to try to prevent competition from others. Oh, they can ask for import protection, tariffs on imports, and restrict competition from abroad. On and on, we gave a bunch of arguments for why monopolizing behavior reduces economic efficiency and thus reduces the well-being of people within the marketplace. Okay, so on the left-hand side, what does that mean? Maintain market freedom. Leave firms free to enter whatever industry they want and compete with other firms, and don't allow the big powerhouses to kind of keep out competitors from coming in. Promote competition is maybe the least ethical principle that I have in mind here, or that's incorporated here. But we can kind of think about this as an ethic of freedom. Allow markets to be free, allow free entry and free exit of firms from a particular industry, like we display in a perfectly competitive market economy, and that by promoting that, we promote economic efficiency at the same time. All right, next one. Secrecy or intellectual property. Remember that in our perfectly competitive market economy, we made the initial assumption that all firms share the same information, meaning they have the same costs of production. And that means that free entry and exit, no monopolizing behavior, is going to actually lead to the lowest cost of production feasible for a particular good that's demanded by consumers. All right. Now, if you protect intellectual property, there's some good sides to that. This is a contentious argument I'm going to make. But intellectual property is providing monopoly privileges or rights over, certain inputs into the production process. And it enables a firm to make monopoly profits or rents for an extended period of time. Firms are also inclined to keep their new ideas secret from other competitors. Natural thing for a business to do, but it is less efficient economically. Kind of think of it this way. Suppose we have a new vaccine that's created for COVID by one manufacturer, and they say, well, we're not going to let anybody else know how to make this, and we're going to try to discourage anyone else from making a vaccine similar to ours so that we can control the market, and then we can set any price we want for this product, and since everybody is going to demand it, we can make a bundle of money. Well, that's not a great outcome. It's not going to be the most efficient. It's not going to generate the widespread well-being across the world population. And it's an example of how intellectual property protections or secrecy can actually lead to a diminished, a poorer market outcome. Okay, so what do? We should be open to sharing information and ideas. Education, like we're doing here at the university level, is very important to try to promote, get ideas out there. Teach science to people. Let individuals know how things work in the world. Don't try to keep it secret and keep it in your country only, because the more you do that, the more you're providing economic rents for certain industries and businesses, and you're diminishing the efficiency of the economic system. Okay, last thing on the principles here is minimize secondary harm. Externalities is what I'm referring to here. It's not a good idea to dump your garbage in your neighbor's lawn. Your neighbor is just not going to appreciate that and is going to complain, and it's going to cause economic conflict. So it's important for individuals to be aware that their activities in both consumption and production can sometimes spill over and have negative effects upon other people. Stated in a positive way on the left-hand side, it's like saying, be a good neighbor. You know, just be aware that your actions affect others. You live in a community, and you should be open not to, I won't dump any of my garbage on your lawn. Maybe it makes sense to dump some of it, and we can work out an agreement between us, the parties that are affected, so that we can come up with a better outcome. And that just means open to restricting your unfettered self-interest in order to promote a better social outcome in society. Now, more can be found. I've got a website that I put together with all of these new ideas, these ideas which are not really new, they're old ideas, but they haven't really been brought to the forefront in economics for a long time. Now, how do we promote ethical behavior? Real quick. We can draw a line between two different ways to get people to act more ethically. One is public methods and one is private methods. Okay, the public methods is to establish a judicial system, have threats of punishment to prevent violence, theft, deception, or fraud. That's what we do now. That's what makes up some of the prime elements of our laws that are restricting and regulating the behavior of individuals. The public method means providing for public goods, like a local police, like an army to protect against foreign, plunder and pillaging that might take place. We need local police in order to maintain local order, because if the police isn't there, we've seen this happen from time to time. If there's no fear that you're going to be arrested or punished for looting, for example, looting happens, and property rights are not protected or need to be protected more if the police is not there. So the police maintains a very important function in society in order to help enforce these laws, especially against theft and violence against each other. All right, and public methods to promote ethical behavior means, pollution control, eliminate monopolies, if you will, as best you can with antitrust laws, have common resource management, introduce regulations to try to control the bad outcomes that can come because of externality effects and monopolizing effects and so forth. But, just as there are public methods to control for these things, there are private methods as well. How do we get people to act appropriately, ethically? Well, one big method that's been used for centuries is religion. Religion has a core of values that are taught to its participants, and they match what you need to do for a good economic system. Be good to each other, don't steal from each other, be honest, fulfill your promises. That is a private method to try to promote ethical behavior and thus a good market outcome. Parental guidance, our parents tell us this, whether we're religious or not. Our parents are going to tell us to be good to each other and to not steal from each other and so forth. Community gossip, I've read some stuff by sociobiologists who have argued that gossip in a small community actually works very well to try to constrain people's negative behavior. If people talk about, Tom down the road who's constantly stealing corn from, the neighbor's field, at night when nobody sees them, and then they talk to each other and they say, well, watch out for Tom. Tom is, and then people keep an eye on him, and that's how gossip can kind of be used as a method of control of individuals. I've seen this term in the literature, which is interesting to me, called self-domestication. How do we get people to act appropriately? Well, we promote guilt or shame for certain violations. If you do a bad thing, your parents are going to yell at you. This is all a process of getting people to constrain their self-interest, to try to prevent them from doing bad things. Why? Well, you could say because it's the right thing, it's what God wants us to do. That's one approach. But you can also say it's because it enables our economy to function more effectively. Okay, some other methods down here. Use walls, locks, guards. You can protect your private property independently in similar ways, and you can use those private methods of protection as well as public methods like local police, for example. Bargaining. We talked about Eleanor Ostrom and Ronald Coase and methods that might be alternatively used in certain circumstances and under certain conditions where individuals can strike deals with each other. And as a result of those deals, maybe you don't need the government to come in and correct for individual problems. So the purpose of this discussion is just to keep you aware of the fact that it's not always there's one way of correcting for these individual problems. There could be multiple ways, and there's both a government and a non-government approach. And at least be aware that this drives considerations. This tends to drive whether you're on the right or the left. So private methods are certainly more applied and believed in by the right in the political spectrum, and public methods are certainly more believed on the left of the political spectrum. I don't know which is right or which is best. I think it's something we can argue about, we can discuss, and there could be differences across different societies.